doing that stuff in a series, those chalkboards, is what got me these projects, just because they could see that I could come up with these ideas really quickly.
Hello and welcome to Brushing Up. My name is Cody and this is Claire. This is a space where we talk about creativity, illustration, and surface pattern design. And today we're going to start out with talking about working in a series. This is something that Claire has blogged about on my blog. Claire, what are the benefits of working in a series?
Hi, Cody. Yeah, this is something that we really wanted to talk about, make a video about, because it's something that is not discussed that often online, I think. But I think it's really important for people to work in a series as creatives. We're going to talk a lot about the benefits, right? But I think the most important thing is that it leads to client work. I've noticed that, especially that when I'm working on personal projects that are in collections, they lead to way more work and interest online on social media as well than standalone pieces. So I think that's the most important thing, really. The first thing that I wanted to mention about this as well is that this little like mini collection of little icons that I did, I think, about a year and a half ago. I basically just did that for my website and social media because I do a bunch of different things like greeting card designs, chalkboard designs, but also online classes on Skillshare about Procreate specifically. So I just wanted to make something that sort of navigational, I guess, so people could just find their way around. And this wasn't in my portfolio at all. But then a couple of months later, someone contacted me to say, we're a graphic design studio and we want to do a little rebranding and we want something like this. And so I ended up doing a bunch of like spot illustrations for their rebrand, for their social media and their website. And I realized that those kind of things, those things that I've done in little collections, have just had the most impact and led to the most work. So that's what I've been focusing on.
So what do we mean by a series of illustrations?
It's basically a cohesive body of work, and that can either be connected through a certain theme, a concept, a certain technique or tool, or just a color palette. Like it can be quite simple, but you just kind of have to see that when you see the visuals together, that they are connected somehow. And I think in surface pattern design, that's called coordinate designs, I
Yeah,
believe.
there's like a hero pattern and then there's a coordinate and a blender, and it just depends on how many pieces you have. But yeah, it's pretty much essentially the same. That's more in fabric design, but a lot of
Yeah.
times you can have placement illustrations that are very similar to like spot illustrations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I was going to mention that spot illustrations, that's quite a common thing that people do in editorial design, right? You have like a main piece and then little visuals that go together, like with that main piece. So that's a kind of series as well. And this is just a really popular way of working in a lot of industries because it works. Like it offers a lot of flexibility. Mainly, it's just like a really good way to work as an artist instead of just doing a standalone piece. That's kind of the most important thing I wanted to mention, that this is a really, really big deal for your portfolio. If you're comparing the two, right? Either a standalone piece or a series, and that can be as small as like 3 pieces next to each other, 3, 5, or 7. The way that a potential client is looking at that, no matter what industry, you get a lot more insight from that series. Potential client is like gonna understand your unique point of view, how you work, how you can come up with ideas much more from a series than from just one little piece. I think what clients mostly are looking for is security and flexibility as well. Like it's great that you can make something beautiful, but they usually need more than just one piece, unless they're like licensing just that one little piece. It's like you could have just been lucky, right? It could just be like a really, really nice thing you did, but can you do it again?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the point. A good example of that is this little personal project I did during the pandemic. Before that, I was doing a lot of hand lettering for local restaurants and bars and shops. And it's kind of during the pandemic that obviously we were stuck at home, couldn't do a lot of work outside. And I was just starting to experiment with digital illustration, and that was all new to me. So I had to find different ways to experiment with that. So I decided to do this little series of mini chalkboards with puns on them. And then specifically like puns about cocktails, it's like everything to do with like tacos and margaritas and just everything in that. And then I could just also share it like every Tuesday on Taco Tuesday. So that worked well and is something that I could keep doing on a weekly basis. And it was a really nice way to experiment with different lettering styles too.
For those who don't know, Claire is the queen of puns. She's written
Thank you. Wow.
about puns on my blog as well, and a lot of her work features puns, which I think is awesome. And I love play on words, so this is right up my alley. I can see why it's resonated with other people.
Such high praise. Thank you. That I like all started during the pandemic because I went a little bit crazy and I was just like laughing to myself with a bunch of puns and just like laughing while like trying to do these different lettering styles. And yeah, that was just like really fun to do. And it just basically allowed me to experiment and figure out how to use a tablet at the time. And then I got contacted by a local Mexican restaurant franchise, and they were opening a bunch of new places right after the lockdown here. And they wanted me to basically hand letter all their windows in the restaurants and the mirrors. So they needed someone to actually not do anything digital. It had nothing to do with puns either. It was just different lettering styles on all of their interior design. So what they needed was someone who could quickly come up with all of these ideas and do a bunch of different stuff, like really quickly, because we were opening a bunch of places.
Wow.
And I think that's kind of doing that stuff in a series, those chalkboards, is what got me these projects, just because they could see that I could come up with these ideas really quickly. It wasn't just about the puns, because I'm in Madrid, Spain. Everything is in Spanish. They weren't going to put like English puns on windows because nobody would understand. It just had to be about doing all these different styles of lettering really quickly. And I think they just needed someone reliable to be able to come up with all of these ideas really quickly. And that also made the briefing process, the sketching process really easy because I didn't know how to use a tablet that well yet. So I just made these like really quick, kind of messy sketches, but they were like, it's fine. We got it. We know you can do it. You've already done it 50 times. So it's fine. Like we trust you to be able to handle it. So that was, I think, a good example, like how easy it is to get clients in when you show them that you repeat your past successes over and over again and give them ideas when they need it, especially in a fast-moving environment. For example, restaurants, like everything needs to go quickly and you don't know when the next project is going to come along, when the next place is going to open. And that kind of allowed me to do a bunch of different stuff, and that gave me work for about a year after the pandemic.
That's
Because then
amazing.
I uploaded, yeah, thank you. That's when I uploaded these photos, and then other places saw that and they were like, oh, we want the same thing. And that's kind of how it kept going.
Shows your versatility of your skills as well.
Hmm.
And you were talking about how, you didn't know much about the tablet, and this showed that you can pick up on a skill and pick it up
Right.
quickly and go with it and show it in different ways. So I think it's also about just expanding your skill set and then also showing how you can repeat that and deliver over and over again.
Yeah, that's a good point about like expanding your skill set, because I often hear like people who mostly work with Procreate, right? Like with the Apple Pencil. I often hear that they feel like they could never do stuff by hand. Like that's a whole different ballpark. And the truth is, it isn't. It's about your ideas. And then once you've done it, if you've done it once, you can do it again. You just need to start, and you'll realize very quickly that it's very similar to working digitally.
I mean, when you
Um,
think about it, you started off with chalkboard designs and the pandemic hit, and you picked it up with the tablet, and then that got
yeah,
picked up, and now, and then you did the signs.
yeah,
Um,
you just pivot. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
So how do you set expectations in your portfolio?
So Yeah, as I said, I mean, basically collections, I think. And it doesn't have to be, collection sounds really big, but anytime I'm saying collection, I'm talking about series as well. I didn't really know which word to pick, but it could be as simple as like 3 pieces next to each other. Sometimes, as an illustrator, you're trying to find a visual way of communicating an idea, right? Communicating your idea. And doing that in just one piece, I think, that's a lot of work. It's a lot of pressure to put on like one piece. So you can then kind of spread it out to like 3 pieces. And even if someone, maybe a potential client, for example, doesn't understand your message from one piece, you've got 2 other pieces supporting it. So it's okay. Like you can show that you can put that together and create more than one thing for a potential client too. So even if a potential client would contact you to say, like, we want that one piece, I want you to do that one thing, but you have so many other good ideas, we can like work on making more stuff together as well. So it's great to have like more than just one piece and show like, hey, I can do a variety of different things as well, which I think is great. And as I said, basically that's what happened with this project as well, right? I basically during this project just continued with these like little mini chalkboards, and then that helped me to get like more clients doing restaurant design, basically when things were opening up again, to do more of the same thing by hand.
That pina colada, was that part of the series?
Yeah, so that was basically like, that was the upstairs of one of the places where it was like a cocktail lounge. So it was like one corner was like margarita corner, and the other one was pina coladas, and the other one was this and that. So everything had to kind of display their classic cocktails, their classic dishes, and stuff like that. And I hadn't done that before, but I had a couple of designs in that lettering style. So they could base it off of that and be like, okay, we have all these windows and mirrors, and they all have to have that kind of style.
Very cool.
That was that. And that's kind of, that inspired me to do more cocktail designs as well. And that then helped me to make more stuff for cocktail bars as well.
That's cool.
And yeah, basically working in collections is really helpful for developing your visual language or your personal style. It's a little bit of a complicated or heavy word, I guess, personal style, because I think a lot of classes online have a lot of advice on how to find your personal style. And I think most of the advice is to niche down, right? As far as possible, niche all the way down so people know you for that one thing. It's not that I disagree with that, but if I were to do that, all I would be doing is doing hand lettering for Mexican style restaurants for the rest of my life. And even though it's a lot of fun, there's not that many restaurants out there. Like, that's a lot of work, and it's a lot of the same thing. And I think working in series allows you to show like, hey, this is what I can do. I love doing this and I'm good at it. But I can also do things that are related, but slightly different. It doesn't always have to be that exact same thing. And I think that's why working in collections allows you to kind of not just niche down, but niche down for a certain period of time before you move on to the next thing. And then not just feel like you're so tied down to like, okay, I always have to do that one thing, but try a couple of different things too. And that is also to say, like I didn't know I was going to end up with doing these Mexican restaurants for the next year or two. I don't know really what I'm doing. It just kind of happened. Like, this is great, but let's move on and try other things too. And I think that's okay too. Like, it would be very limiting to just stay in that same lane the entire time and not move out of that. I think that's the best way to develop who you are as an illustrator or surface designer or lettering artist. And I still enjoy doing these kind of things, but I think it's important to explore other alleys as well.
I think that's a really great point, that there is a lot of advice and a lot of it says to niche down. And yeah, I agree. I think that is true, but yeah, it's very limiting. So it doesn't really kind of allow you to grow this way, kind of like you're doing that, but it's not like forever.
Yeah, imagine if we were forced to stage and could never try anything else. Because the truth is, like, certain techniques or concepts or themes, they change the way that you work as well. Even though we mentioned, like you can go from digital and to hand lettering back. Certain tools change your style as well. For example, for me, I did mostly hand lettering before. I had to learn how to keep things simple. A painting on a mirror like this was a great example. This gets so filthy so quickly. So I just learned to do things really simply, like just keep it really simple, not do anything too complicated, no like layers on top of layers. It's impossible. When I started doing more stuff on the iPad, I just kind of stuck to that a little bit, and that kind of inspired what I'm doing digitally as well, which is also a little bit more about like keeping it simple, not too much going on, because that's not something that I started with doing by hand either. And I think this one especially is a good example of that, where I kept things really simple and I repeated a lot of elements in this specific like mini series. This is something that I did last year for Retro Supply. They make Pro-K brushes and tutorials, and every October they do a drawing challenge, which revolves around Halloween. What you get is a brush set that you're working with, and then a new word every day. So that's your theme, and then everything else is up to you. But I knew that I didn't have time to do 30 pieces. So for me, my minimum is like 3 to 5 pieces. That's like the minimum goal. And that's enough to, I think, develop your visual language to kind of experiment with one specific thing that you're doing. And then kind of deciding like, is this for me? Did I enjoy doing this? What did I like? What did I not like? And then you just take the parts that you enjoyed to the next project that you're doing.
I just noticed that the little bottle says Bone Voyage.
I was practicing with lettering a little bit here and like repeating patterns and stuff as well. This was because I had limited time. I copied a lot of shapes. Like for example, this cocktail glass on the first one. I just copied it on top of this TV. And also this TV is just the same as this one. This cat, I just flipped it. Like just kept things really simple to kind of save time.
Yeah.
But then also it turned out that actually people enjoyed that like repetition. People enjoy seeing that basically.
Feels
So
good.
that just worked in my favor.
Yeah. People like familiarity, it seems like, and yeah, and by you doing the repetition of the elements, that kind of brings that into place.
Mm-hmm.
To watch that a little bit in surface pattern design if you're licensing and selling, because sometimes a company wants the stuff that you to make to be exclusive to them, but there's no saying that you can't redraw something. And so I always like at times, with repetition, it's great to have like develop a sketchbook full of like elements that you can kind of refer back to. And then for redrawing stuff or just like thinking of different ways with a little spin on it each time you do it. But yeah, it's great as I think really like an exercise. And really, I mean, flipping the cat, I mean, I wouldn't have known that that was the same cat. You hadn't told me that.
A good tip, like just keeping those initial sketches, right? And then redrawing that, repeating those shapes or the way that you draw certain things. And that can then become part of your visual language. And a series allows you to try that a couple of times, see if you like it. It's all experimenting, right? When I made this, I was kind of experimenting with like, I'm making a lot of cocktail glasses also for clients. How can I draw a cocktail glass? What is my signature cocktail glass that I can just keep reusing? And I just stuck to that piece. If you were to not copy it, but actually redraw that, it would still look very similar, but it's still its own as well. And the same thing with that TV or that cat, for example, that could then just become your signature cat. I don't know, I guess.
There's a personal style.
Exactly. Yes. Personal cat, personal style. And because you've not just done it once, you've done it a couple of times. The first time is just like an experiment, kind of like, I don't know what I'm doing. At least in my experience of how it goes. The second time, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, this feels a little bit more familiar. The third, fourth, and fifth time is like, I know what I'm doing. I've done it before now. Now I know exactly what I'm doing. If this was just a one-off piece that I'd done, like the first one was actually the Stay Spooky tombstone. If that was just on its own standalone piece, I would feel a lot less confident about what I did. If somebody were to ask me like, can you draw a cat again? I'd be like, I don't know how to draw cats. I don't know how to do that. Sorry. I can't take on this project. But because I've done it another time now, and I also experimented with different cats in this Broommates illustration, now I feel a lot more confident, and I could say like, yeah, I can probably do that. It's like a 95% yes instead of like a 95% no on drawing cats,
Yeah,
basically.
it's clever. I see you have the big roommates, this bottom, and then you have it repeated in your TV screen, which I think is very clever.
Yeah, I mean, just repurposing certain parts, and it's easy. And another thing that's really helpful with doing stuff like this, if you don't have a lot of time, is limit the color palette. Just stick to a couple of colors, and then you won't spend all your time experimenting with different colors, not knowing what to do. Instead, you just have a couple of things to play with, and you're just like, well, I don't have a choice. The rest of my collection is already in these like 1, 2, or 3 colors. So that's just what I have to use, and I just have to be clever about it. No time to waste.
I think color can be really overwhelming for a lot of artists. I know it is for me. So I
Yeah,
think
same.
automatically doing a restriction on your colors when you're starting something like this, maybe even all things really, is a really good strategy. And then it can also go back into developing your personal styles. Because I found that when I made like a color palette of colors that I liked and for my work to just kind of like bounce off like as a starting point if I ever became stuck, that I've started using certain colors over and over again naturally, and
Yeah,
people start to recognize that like color usage over and over that you become known for.
yeah, good point. I think that's such a clever way to just not just develop your style, your visual language, but also work in a collection, in a series, even if you're not starting out or planning, like I'm going to do a series now for the next month, just sticking to a color palette and then making works with the color palette. That could work together too. That could be a collection on its own. And I've definitely done that as well, where things, they didn't start out as I want these to be connected, but because I was just working with 1 or 2 colors, they just match naturally. The same thing with those mini chalkboards. I just made sure that I stuck to those same colors and kept it really minimal. And that way, even if the lettering styles were all over the place, because I had no idea what I was doing, they still kind of matched together. Didn't really matter what was inside of them because the concept and the colors were the same.
Yeah, it's a really great strategy to do, I think, in not getting like beating the overwhelm.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings us to basically the art of repetition. Like we just talked about how overwhelm, right? Like it's easier for us to repurpose or repeat certain visual elements or parts of your work. And it also helps you develop your visual language, but it's also good for your audience. I think sometimes we're worried that our audience thinks that we're all doing the same thing, or that we're not necessarily doing the same thing, but reusing a lot of the same things, I guess.
Like maybe they're going to get bored.
Yeah, I guess that's a good one. Yeah. Sometimes we think that our audience can get bored of our work or that we're repurposing too much, maybe. I've definitely had that fear sometimes. But the thing is, people come back to what you're making because they prefer to see something that is similar to what you're already doing than something that is completely different. And even if an artist is experimenting with something new, we still want to see that as kind of part of your same thinking process, that you're executing those ideas in your own way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Does that make sense?
I think it does.
Okay, sorry. I wasn't sure if it actually does.
Well, if people like coming back to, they know that you can do it. So I think that's why they keep coming back, because they like how you approach things. And so I think if you kind of repeat, and a lot of times people don't even know that you're repeating, because especially if you're doing these series, you may be approaching it the same way, but it's something different. So it's still interesting to see. I think a lot of times also artists like internalize a little bit like what we're doing, and so it leads to just like questioning a lot when a lot of people, especially with the way social media is now, with you know not getting seen as much, that we tend to get in our heads more than, and people are not really seeing as much as they're we think that they're seeing even.
Yeah, that's true.
That's a whole other topic.
No, that's exactly it. Not just repurposing things that you've already done, but working in that way is really helpful. It makes you recognizable, right? And people like the anticipation of like they know this thing you've already done and it looks great, and they would like to see you repeat those successes again. That's what they want to see as well. It's not that different from like a TV series or fashion collection, for example. Like you kind of like, you know what you like, so you kind of want to see those same things again, but in a different way. That doesn't mean that, as I said before about niching down, right, that it always has to be the same thing. You can just do that for a certain amount of time and then move on to the next thing and try something else. But it just helps for a while, at least, for people to familiarize themselves with your visual language, the elements that you're using, or the kind of things that you're interested in. I think greeting cards are a good example of that because they kind of have to work on their own, but they usually come in like sets as well. So then they kind of have to work together. It's kind of like a mini collection, but they also have to be their own thing. So then if you like repeat certain elements, even if it's just like certain shapes, a certain color palette, if you repeat that, then you already have a connection and they go well together. So it's just more satisfying to see. When you share that on social media, people kind of know what to expect. So it really helps you to build that momentum with your audience, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
This is an example of a greeting card series that I did a couple of years ago. This was printed locally. I did this for a couple of local markets. So those cards had to be both in English and in Spanish. And there's a bunch of different other holidays that are celebrated here as well. And I wanted to make sure that I had like a card for each holiday, for each audience, but they also kind of had to make sense together. So there was a lot of different things I had to combine. And I had to plan it quite well to make sure that every card worked on its own, but also in a set so that it was its own little collection. So I just set these like rules for myself of like the lettering is going to be similar in each of these, but then those little drawings go around it in the same way. Even though they're all different in each of these holidays, the kind of like the way they're set up or the layout, I guess it's similar so that they're still connected in some way. And so that's basically to say that like to build a collection like this, it doesn't have to be super complicated. They could just be connected in some way, even if it's just like composition. That way they still go together.
This is a great example of that because everything really does stand on its own.
Mm-hmm.
You can definitely see a thread throughout with just the layout in itself.
Yeah.
But the colors are very complementary. So even if you were to show them all together, they still definitely go together. But yeah, at the same time, very much can be on their own.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is in my Skillshare classes that where I teach a bit more like about Procreate and illustrating in Procreate. I also try to like encourage people to work in a series, even though usually it's just like one project on its own. Again, it's like better to maybe try a couple of different versions of that, not just to like work on your technique that you're learning in that specific class, but then also you have a collection on its own. In this case, this is just like the sketching phase is the same. It then has all the students have this like final sketch in color. But then what I try to show in this is that you can change it up in the execution, even if you're still working in the same colors, same sketch as well. The only thing that's really changed is the brushes that we're using in this. If you were to, let's say, have another version of this, you also have a series. Like it's not that complicated. There's so much you can do with just one piece and then turning that into multiple pieces by just maybe changing up the color, changing up the texture, and trying these different ways to finish an illustration up.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I really hope that that also inspires people to make more than one piece, because otherwise it's great to learn a certain technique, but it'd be better if you could walk away from it with like a mini collection, right? Like something that works in a variety of different illustrations.
And seeing your like sketch and then these two versions right here, it reminds me almost like you would kind of do that naturally in the sketching process in the beginning, where we're like putting out all our ideas. I mean, if you think of it that way, I mean, in a sense, that is kind of working in a series automatically. We just don't really think about it that way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's actually so easy to, from that phase, you just go from that sketching phase and then just split it up into three pieces. It could even be the same thing, but in three different color palettes. I think that's quite common in pattern design, right? You just try that out, that same pattern in three different color palettes, and there you go, you've got a collection.
Yeah, and a lot of times, like, it really does take as little as three. It seems like I've seen a lot of things that I've watched, like with workshops and stuff like that. 3 to 5 seems to be the standard now, but they used to be huge collections that people would make for fabric, especially. They still do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it really doesn't take much though. It can still just be 3 for a series or a collection.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think three is definitely a good number, and it's also a nice goal to set for yourself. If, especially with personal projects, we tend to not have a lot of time for that. So to expect someone to make like 12 pieces is a bit insane, but three is a good goal. That's all you need. Speaking of threes, I actually have threes over here. This is a greeting card design collection I did last year. And I think the final, I ended up making about 6 or 7 in this. But what I wanted to do is stick to something a little bit longer, like Christmas, New Year's Eve, the festive season, all the way up to Valentine's Day as well. And I wanted to find a way to connect those. What I wanted to do is just reuse a couple of visual elements. And that's the way I connected those. It kind of worked separately, but also together. So in this way, I just reused that background shape and then made sure that I always had an illustration in the middle and then really simple lettering around it. And those are my only rules. That was just like the rules I set for myself. And that made sure that that collection kept working, because I wasn't sure how much time I was going to have to do all of this. But I didn't have to worry about it too much if I just kept sticking to those rules.
I've noticed you use a lot of like different shapes for your background in a lot of your work, which I think is not something I see very often. I think that's something that can be forgotten about and is something, a really good thing to consider when you're just all the different things that you can do to kind of keep that thread when you're working in a series.
Yeah, if there's nothing else that you can use, just keep the background the same shape, do something different, and people be like, oh, that's funny, I've never seen that before, and it's connected. It's really easy to tie all of those things together, even when they surpass, I guess, these different holidays, where normally you wouldn't really connect Valentine's Day cards with New Year's Eve or Christmas, for example. You can kind of tie all those together. And actually, I even included like Thanksgiving in this. It was just like, I'm not going to have that much time. They're all together in one. So
Yeah.
if you just find like really simple rules to stick to, then you can keep. In the next part, I will also explain a bit more about how I did the series in parts and the planning phase of that as well.
How do you build momentum for creating illustrations in a series?
So the specific part, I think, is, yeah, it's pretty important because it can be quite overwhelming, especially with personal projects, to keep going with stuff. And it also can be really complicated, I think. So I think planning is really annoying, but planning is important. But as we mentioned before, right, it doesn't have to be too complicated. I've also definitely started series not knowing how much time I was going to have, when I was going to get bored and just want to move on. So you can just make the rules quite simple and just build on that as much as you can. But I try to keep things quite organized and kind of start with lots of ideas before I execute any final illustrations, basically. And then give myself plenty of ideas so that next time when I do have time to draw, I don't have to start at zero. I can just pick up where I left off. And I think this is especially important when you don't have a lot of time for personal project. Even if you just have 20 minutes a week to do some drawing, if you have some thumbnail sketches to start with, then you can just pick up where you left off. And so starting with those thumbnail sketches, setting those limitations is going to make it a lot easier to pick up anytime that you have some time to work on it. to be able to build on that instead of having to start with like a new idea every time that you have a moment to do some drawing.
So what do you do to simplify your illustration projects or decide what to pick as your next project?
So I usually like to work with puns. So there's a lot of inspiration to take from that. So I just start with like planning my goal, basically, like what I want to do, and also trying to keep it simple. Like that example I showed before of those like greeting cards or like really simple illustrations, simple lettering. It doesn't have to be complicated. So just set that rule for yourself in the beginning, like keep it simple. And then that also helps with like not perfecting every single illustration and just kind of like knowing when to stop and then move on to the next one. And maybe instead of focusing on one piece, divide that energy into 3 pieces if you can. Even if you're a perfectionist, like to try and do that is really helpful. And then setting those limitations visually, setting those rules in the beginning. And that helps with not having to start from scratch every time that you have some time to work on it. And I think this is a good example of that. This is like a mini festive greeting card collection I did years ago. And I think this is the first time I intentionally started with, I want to make a little mini series, just 3 cards. I don't have a lot of time. I don't know how to do digital drawing that well yet. And I don't have a lot of confidence in my lettering. So like a lot of stuff I had to keep in mind here. Plus, it had to be very flexible. I had to be able to change this because this was also, again, for local markets. So I wanted to make something that was bilingual. I wanted to make an English version and a Spanish version. The rules I kind of set for myself were I don't want to do like traditional Christmas colors. I'm just going to stick to pink, mostly a little bit of red and then brown, and that's it. I want to do one that is lettering only, the one on the right. I want to do one that's like an illustration, maybe with lettering inside, and then one that's like lettering that I could really easily change the language of if I needed to.
I was just gonna say that's really interesting how you included what you wanted in almost the limitations. Like how you wanted the
Yeah.
lettering, how you wanted the lettering with the illustration, then you wanted in both. I think that in itself was a limitation. I wouldn't
Mhm.
even thought of that way. That including a want is almost in itself a limitation.
Yeah. Yeah. And it also helps with selling your greeting cards, I think, because it was a bit of an experiment. I wasn't really sure what people were gonna pick up on and what they would enjoy or like. Basically, there are only 3. And I made these little packages, right? I was with my studio where I print everything. With some, I put the lettering one in front. Other ones, I put like the little gingerbread house in front. And then the other one also like the Spanish one in front so that people could pick. And I'd be like, oh, this is the one I like the most. This is the one that sparks my attention. And then they get those other 2 in the back as well. So it's also kind of like a selling point where I was like, I want to show that you can pick your favorite first if you wanted to. So it's also like just a good way to sell. And I wanted to show that I was able to do lettering on its own, but also illustration, that's like a combination that could, you could do both.
So I'm curious, did you notice if one was resonated with people better than the other?
Yeah, the gingerbread house, and that's the one that actually had only the English lettering. I didn't even change that because that was kind of like inside of it, and it wasn't as important to change the message. That one I still print every year, and I still sell those cards as well, the most. So
Wow.
yeah, but it's good that you can. If this was a standalone little gingerbread house, that'd be great. But because there's 2 more cards, you can have this little set and sell it to people as a set. Because it's very rare that people want to just send out 1 card. They usually want more in one. That's how I would also buy stuff in a minimum of 3 cards. I would never buy one on its own. I would want more of the same thing.
But it keeps it all
So yeah.
together with that tying of
Yeah.
colors and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But so yeah, for something like this, if you have very limited time, or if you know that December is going to happen soon, if you set those rules for yourself, then you can go pretty quick. Anytime you then make something, looking back at those rules and be like, okay, check, 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 I'm done. No more working, done. It's good as it is. Helps you set those boundaries and tell yourself, like, okay, it's finished. Like, we don't need to go 120%. We're done. So
Yeah.
that really helps if you're a bit of a perfectionist too. And I definitely need that. So
Yes. Me as well. I think a lot of artists run into that trap.
yeah, it's an easy trap to fall into.
So could you make something with this theme or concept again? Or would you prefer to start something else completely?
So what I would try and do is always work in like 3 or 5 final pieces as much as possible. And I think especially if you're in the beginning of your illustration journey, then setting that goal is you might just want to move on after that because you're trying to still figure out what you want to do. And then if you kind of realize like after 3 pieces, like I'm kind of done, I'm over this, you want to try something else, then you can just move on. But I think the more experienced you get, the more you kind of know what you like, you kind of know what you enjoy doing and what you want to do more of. And then it's kind of easier to stick to something. For example, that series that I showed before about the festive greeting card designs and Valentine's Day ones, I had so many sketches from then, and I did that last year and I kind of ran out of time. I really want to pick that up again this because I still draw the same way. I still really enjoy doing that. But for example, 5 years ago, I would have been like, ugh, so ugly, I'm done. I want to do something else. But I think the more experienced you get, the easier it is to maybe look back at all the work and say like, okay, I did this one piece, I really enjoyed it. Let me pick that up again. Maybe I can do that same thing again, but try it in different ways, turn it into a little collection, a personal project. I think that just gets easier over time. And I sometimes look back at like all the work and regret not doing more of it. For example, this like Netflix thing that I did, this was just for a competition. And that was the first time I did food lettering, but I really enjoyed it. But it took such a long time to figure out like how to actually put it together, like cutting all the chili peppers and the black parts, that's sesame seeds, like how to like make those letters, really use a brush to like clean everything up and stuff. Now I kind of regret not doing maybe 2 more of that, like something in a similar style, because I had all that stuff already. And it was the preparation that was the most work. And I think had I actually done 3 chili related puns in that same style, it would have had more of an impact and would have led to more projects as well. Instead, this was just kind of one thing and that's it. And I also now like don't really want to do it again because it was such a mess. I found sesame seeds everywhere for months. And it's just more difficult to pick it back up again, especially when you do something by hand. But yeah, so sometimes, I kind of wish that I always had that collection mindset because it changes the way that you can present projects.
I have a couple of, or my fine art pieces that are supposed to be 3 pieces, and I stopped at 2 or 1. Yeah, it's easy
Mm.
to, with the shiny object syndrome, to move on.
Mm-hmm. I think, yeah, especially if you're in the beginning of your illustration journey, right? Like things can take such a long time. You're experimenting with all these different tools and techniques. And just one piece alone can take so much time that you're like, ugh, I'm done now. I have a headache. I don't want to do this anymore. I want to move on. And then, yeah, you kind of regret it afterwards because it's like, I should have stuck to that same thing and maybe try it a few different ways. I don't know. But it's never too late to look back at all the work and pick it back up again, right? That little mini collection of icons that I showed that I did for my website in the beginning, I kind of build that every month and like add to that just because I kind of realized how valuable that was and I just kept growing that. And that's now kind of part of my style, like stuff that I use everywhere with the same kind of lines. That just became part of what I keep doing and building on every month. Yeah, so looking at older work is a really great way to look for inspiration for personal projects and working in collections. And it's definitely never too late to look at older stuff that you've done.
I think that's a good point too, because a lot of times we need that break, I think, because I know I'm really bad about working on something and then knowing now I need to take a break because when I come back to it, it's usually after that night or couple days or however long, I see it in a totally different, fresh set of eyes, and it's not nearly as bad as I thought it was when I was really deep into it. So I think
Yeah.
it is really good to go back and look at your old work and see where you can pick up and find new inspiration and use your new skill sets that you've acquired along the way. Because if you keep working and doing things, even with limitations, you're going to grow. So yeah, I think that's a really great practice to do.
Absolutely, yeah.
So thank you for listening. Stay tuned for the next part where we discuss how to make powerful personal work in a series.
Yeah, absolutely.
End credits.
Check, done.
My dog is pacing back and forth behind me.
Just like disappear. Hello.
See his butt. It's his best part.